I never thought I would spend my 72nd birthday sitting alone in a Chicago diner, staring at a cup of lukewarm coffee while my family celebrated without me across town. But that is exactly where I found myself on a cold November evening. My hands trembled as I held my phone, reading the group text that had come through an hour earlier, a photo of my son, my husband, and my daughter-in-law raising champagne glasses in our dining room, the dining room I had scrubbed on my hands and knees just that morning, captioned simply with "family time." I want to share something with you today that I have kept buried for too long, something that nearly destroyed me before I found the strength to fight back. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, if you have ever questioned whether the people you love are using you, then maybe my story will resonate with you. I am asking you to like this video and subscribe, not for me, but because there might be someone out there who needs to hear that they are not crazy, that their feelings are valid, and that there is a way out of the darkness. Please, help me reach them. My daughter-in-law Rebecca moved into our Wicker Park brownstone 3 years ago when she married my son Thomas. From the beginning, she had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes, like she was performing kindness rather than feeling it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was one of those terrible mother-in-laws you see in sitcoms, the kind who cannot let go. So I tried harder. I baked her favorite lemon bars every Sunday. I babysat her 2 children from a previous marriage without complaint, even when my arthritis made it painful to lift the youngest. I rearranged my entire routine around her schedule, her preferences, her needs. I remember the first time I realized something was truly wrong. It was about 6 months after she moved in. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing for her birthday celebration. Homemade lasagna, garlic bread from scratch, a 3-layer chocolate cake that took me 4 hours to perfect. My kitchen looked like a war zone, flour dusting every surface, chocolate smudges on my apron, but I was happy. I wanted Rebecca to feel welcomed, to know that I accepted her as part of our family. The cake alone had been a labor of love. I had used my mother-in-law's recipe, the one she had made for every special occasion. 3 layers of rich chocolate sponge, separated by silky chocolate ganache, topped with homemade buttercream frosting. My hands had cramped from all the mixing, and I had burned my finger on the oven rack reaching for the 2nd layer, but I did not care. This was how I showed love, through food, through effort, through the time I spent making something perfect for someone else. When they arrived home that evening, Rebecca walked into the kitchen, looked at the spread I had prepared, and her face fell. Not in a subtle way, but dramatically, like I had done something offensive. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "I told Thomas weeks ago that I am trying a new diet. No carbs, no sugar. Did he not tell you?" I looked at Thomas, who suddenly became very interested in his phone. I must have forgotten," he mumbled. But I had never been told. I would have remembered. I always remembered details about the people I loved. Rebecca knew this. I could see it in the slight curve of her lip, the way her eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. She was testing me, seeing how I would react, establishing a pattern where I was always the one who forgot, who failed, who disappointed. "It is okay," I said, forcing a smile. "I can make you a salad. I have fresh vegetables in the—" "Do not trouble yourself," Rebecca interrupted, already pulling out her phone. "We will just order something appropriate. Thomas, call that new vegan place downtown." I stood in my destroyed kitchen, surrounded by food that no one would eat, and I felt something shift. It was not anger, not yet. It was more like a door closing somewhere inside me, the first of many that would eventually lock me out of my own life. Later that night, after they had eaten their vegan takeout and gone to bed, I wrapped up the lasagna and the cake. I tried to give them to neighbors the next day, but even that felt humiliating. Mrs. Patterson from next door looked at the elaborate spread with sympathetic eyes that told me she knew something was wrong. "Rebecca did not like it?" she asked gently. "Diet," I said, forcing a smile. "She is on a diet." Mrs. Patterson took the food, but I saw the pity in her expression. That pity would become familiar over the next 2 years, a look I would see more and more often in the eyes of people who used to see me as capable and strong. Rebecca was reshaping how the world saw me, one small interaction at a time, and I was letting her do it. The brownstone had been in my family for 40 years. My late mother-in-law left it to me, not to my husband Gerald, but to me specifically. The deed had my name on it. I had always been proud of that, proud that someone had seen my worth enough to trust me with something so valuable. The property was worth nearly $2 million now, sitting in a neighborhood that had transformed from working class to trendy almost overnight. Rebecca knew this. I caught her looking at real estate websites more than once, her eyes lingering on listings in our area with a hunger that made my stomach turn. I had spent 38 years working as a public school teacher on the South Side, pouring my energy into children who needed someone to believe in them. I retired at 65, exhausted but fulfilled, with a modest pension and some savings I had carefully built. Gerald had worked in insurance sales, but he was never good with money. He spent it as fast as he made it on golf memberships and expensive dinners with clients who never materialized into real business. By the time he retired, we were living mostly on my pension and the rental income from the basement apartment in our brownstone. That basement apartment became a point of tension the moment Rebecca arrived. She wanted it for a home office, she said, somewhere she could focus on her online boutique business. I explained that we needed the rental income, that it brought in $1,800 a month that covered our property taxes and utilities. She smiled that cold smile and said she understood, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. 2 weeks later, Gerald started talking about how we did not really need the money, how we should support Rebecca's entrepreneurial dreams, how family was more important than a few $100s. A few $100s. He had reduced my financial security to pocket change. I gave in. I always gave in. The tenant moved out, and Rebecca transformed the space into something that looked more like a storage unit than an office, filled with boxes of unsold inventory and a desk she never sat at. The rental income disappeared, and suddenly I was dipping into my savings to cover the shortfall. When I mentioned this to Gerald, he waved his hand dismissively and told me I worried too much. The isolation started so gradually that I did not notice it at first. Rebecca would schedule family dinners on nights when my book club met, then act hurt when I said I had other plans. She would invite Gerald to events and somehow forget to mention them to me until afterward. She started calling me Eleanor instead of Mom, which Thomas quickly adopted. Even Gerald began using my first name more often, as if I had been demoted from wife to roommate. One particular evening stands out in my memory. It was a Thursday, and I had been looking forward to my book club meeting all week. We were discussing The Age of Innocence, and I had prepared notes, highlighted passages, things I was excited to share. At 4 p.m, Rebecca knocked on my bedroom door. "Eleanor, I hate to ask this," she said, and I could already feel my plans crumbling. "But I completely forgot I have a critical business meeting tonight. A potential investor for the boutique? This could change everything for us. Would you mind watching the kids? I know you have your little book thing, but this is really important." My little book thing. She had diminished something I loved, something that kept me connected to the world, to 2 hours of babysitting she could have arranged days in advance. But what could I say? How could I choose a little book thing over my daughter-in-law's business success, over my grandchildren's care? "Of course," I heard myself say. "The book club can wait." I called Donna to cancel. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, the unspoken question, "Why do you keep bailing on us?" But I did not have an answer I could articulate. Not then. Rebecca came home at 11:30 that night, smelling of wine and expensive perfume. No papers, no business materials, no signs of a meeting at all. When I asked how it went, she waved her hand vaguely. "Oh, it was fine. Turned out to be more of a social thing. You know how these networking events are." I did not know. But I knew I had been played. This became a pattern. Every time I had plans, Rebecca found a reason I needed to cancel. Her patterns were sophisticated. She never asked directly twice in a row, sometimes going weeks without requesting anything. Long enough that I would lower my guard. Then, inevitably, another emergency would arise, another critical moment where I was the only one who could help. My friends from the book club called less and less. When I finally worked up the courage to ask why, my friend Donna said quietly that Rebecca had told several people I was becoming forgetful and confused, that I had gotten lost coming home from the grocery store. This was a complete fabrication. I had never gotten lost. But the seed had been planted, and people started treating me differently, speaking more slowly, asking if I needed help with simple tasks. I stopped going to book club altogether. It hurt too much to see the pity in their eyes, to feel like a burden. I stopped calling my sister in Milwaukee because Rebecca always seemed to be listening, making pointed comments about long-distance charges, even though I had unlimited calling on my plan. I stopped attending Sunday services at the Lutheran church I had belonged to for decades because Rebecca had convinced Thomas to switch to a contemporary service across town, and I was expected to babysit while they went as a family. My world shrank to the walls of that brownstone, to the rooms where I was still allowed to exist without feeling like an intruder. I took up residence mostly in my bedroom, a space that had once been a sanctuary but now felt like a cell. I would sit by the window for hours, watching neighbors walk their dogs, watching life happen outside while I faded inside. There was a young woman who lived across the street, maybe 30 years old, who left for work every morning at 7:15. She always wore bright colors, red coats, yellow scarves, purple shoes. I found myself waiting by the window to see what she would wear, this small splash of color in my increasingly gray world. She never knew she was keeping me tethered to life, that her existence reminded me there was still vibrancy somewhere, even if I could no longer access it. On particularly difficult mornings, I would imagine her life. Maybe she was a graphic designer, or worked in marketing, or taught kindergarten. Maybe she had a partner who made her coffee before she left. Maybe she had parents who called to check on her, friends who texted her throughout the day, a life filled with people who saw her and valued her. I invented elaborate stories about her, this stranger whose only crime was wearing cheerful clothing, because her imagined happiness was easier to bear than my own very real misery. One morning, she looked up at my window and waved. Just a simple gesture, a neighborly acknowledgement. I waved back, and then I cried for 20 minutes, because that small moment of human connection, that recognition that I existed, that I was visible to someone, felt like water after weeks in the desert. The financial manipulation accelerated. Rebecca convinced Gerald that we should consolidate our accounts, that it would be easier for her to manage the household expenses since she was so good with numbers. Somehow, my name came off the checking account. When I asked about it, Gerald said it was just simpler this way, that I could always ask him if I needed anything. Ask him for access to my own money. I remember standing at the bank, trying to make a withdrawal, and being told the account was no longer in my name. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, looked embarrassed for me. "I am sorry, ma'am. You will need to have Mr. Hartwell come in to authorize any transactions." I was 71 years old. I had been managing money since I was 16. I had put myself through college, bought my first car, helped finance our first home. And now I needed my husband's permission to access my own pension money. I walked out of that bank and sat in my car for 20 minutes, shaking. Not from cold, though it was a bitter February day. From rage, from humiliation, from the dawning realization that I was being systematically stripped of my autonomy, and I had been complicit in it by being too polite, too accommodating, too desperate to keep the peace. I watched people walk in and out of the bank, living their normal lives, conducting their normal transactions. A young mother with a toddler depositing a check. An elderly man, probably my age, withdrawing cash and chatting with the teller about the weather. A businesswoman in a sharp suit, confidently signing documents. All of them had access to their own money. All of them were treated like competent adults. I had once been that woman in the sharp suit. I had managed a classroom of 30 students, handled budgets, made decisions that affected children's futures. I had balanced checkbooks and paid mortgages and navigated the financial complexities of life for decades. And now I needed permission to access my own pension. How had I let this happen? When had I surrendered so much of myself that I had become this helpless creature who accepted being treated like a child? The answer was simple and devastating. Slowly. So slowly, I had not noticed until it was almost too late. Then came the credit cards. Rebecca opened several in my name, claiming she needed them for business expenses that would be paid back immediately. The paybacks never came. I started receiving bills for thousands of dollars in charges I had not made, purchases from boutique wholesalers and online retailers I had never heard of. When I confronted her, she cried and said she had made a mistake, that she thought Gerald had approved it, that she would take care of everything. She never did. My credit score began to plummet. 40 years of perfect payment history, destroyed in months. I felt trapped, ashamed, unable to tell anyone because who would believe that my own family was stealing from me? They would think I was the confused old woman Rebecca had painted me as. The breaking point started with something small, as these things often do. I had made pot roast for Sunday dinner, Gerald's favorite, the recipe I had perfected over decades of marriage. I set the table with the good china, lit candles, even put on the dress Gerald had always loved. When they came home, Rebecca took one look at the table and said they had already eaten, that she had made reservations at a new restaurant downtown and assumed I would not want to go because it was too trendy for my taste. My taste. She had decided what my taste was. Gerald barely glanced at the pot roast before heading upstairs to change. Thomas gave me an apologetic shrug but followed his wife out the door. I sat alone at that carefully set table, watching the candles burn down, watching the gravy congeal, watching everything I had prepared with love turn cold and unwanted. I could not eat. I sat there until the candles guttered out, until the house was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through the lace curtains my mother-in-law had hung decades ago. Those curtains had survived. Why could I not? That night, lying in bed alone because Gerald was snoring in the guest room. He had moved there months ago, claiming my restlessness kept him awake. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way Rebecca would steer conversations away whenever I spoke. The way Thomas would check his phone with exaggerated interest if I started telling a story. The way Gerald had stopped asking about my day entirely. I was being erased. Slowly, methodically, I was being removed from my own life. The next morning, I woke early and did something I had not done in years. I went through Gerald's desk in the home office. My hands shook as I opened drawers, feeling like a criminal in my own house, but something pushed me forward. I needed to understand what was happening. The desk was an old oak piece, heavy and solid, that had belonged to Gerald's father. It had 5 drawers, 3 small ones across the top and 2 larger ones below. I started with the top drawers, finding the usual detritus of a retired man's life. Old pens that no longer worked, paper clips, sticky notes with phone numbers for businesses that had probably closed years ago. The middle drawer held file folders with outdated insurance documents, warranties for appliances we no longer owned, instruction manuals for electronics that had been replaced. I almost gave up. Almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were none. But then, I remembered Rebecca's face when she looked at the pot roast, that flash of contempt she had not quite hidden. I remembered the bank teller's embarrassed expression. I remembered my name disappearing from accounts, from conversations, from my own life. I pulled out the bottom drawer. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old tax returns, I found a folder. Inside were bank statements for accounts I did not know existed. Accounts in Gerald's name and Rebecca's name. Accounts showing regular transfers from our joint account, the one that still had my pension deposited each month. Thousands of dollars, moved systematically over 18 months. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. I sat down in Gerald's leather chair, the one he had spent $1,000 on despite our budget concerns, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, to read every page carefully. The transfers were methodical. Never the same amount, never on the same day of the month. Someone had been careful, trying to avoid a pattern that might trigger automatic fraud alerts. But they added up. Over 18 months, they had taken nearly $60,000 from our joint account. $60,000. My teaching pension, my years of careful saving, funneled into secret accounts I had no access to. There were also printouts of emails between Rebecca and a real estate attorney, discussing the process of removing someone from a property deed in Illinois. The subject line made my blood run cold. Preparing for the transfer. They were planning to take my house. My mother-in-law's house, the one she had left specifically to me because she knew Gerald could not be trusted with assets. They were going to take it, and based on the timeline in the emails, they were moving faster than I had realized. There were notes about my declining mental state and inability to manage financial affairs. There was even a draft letter to my pension fund, requesting that payments be redirected to Gerald as my primary caregiver. One email in particular made me physically ill. It was from Rebecca to the attorney, dated 3 weeks earlier. The subject is becoming more compliant. We have successfully isolated her from her support network, and the community narrative about her declining faculties is well established. Gerald has been excellent at reinforcing her self-doubt. I estimate we can move forward with the competency evaluation within 60 days. Dr. Morrison has already agreed to provide the necessary documentation in exchange for the consulting fee we discussed. The subject. They were calling me the subject, like I was an experiment, a problem to be solved rather than a person who had loved them, sacrificed for them, opened her home and her heart. I sat in that desk chair, surrounded by evidence of betrayal so profound it felt like drowning. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced without care, without knowledge of the devastation happening below them. I thought about all the times I had excused their behavior, all the times I had blamed myself for being too sensitive, too demanding, too old-fashioned. But this was not sensitivity. This was theft. This was abuse. And they had been counting on my silence, on my willingness to doubt myself, on my desperate need to believe that family meant something. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, my hands steadier now that I had proof I was not imagining things. I took pictures of the bank statements, the emails, the draft letter to my pension fund. Everything. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it, making sure each paper was in the same position, the same angle. Then I went to the kitchen and made myself breakfast for the first time in months without worrying about anyone else's preferences. I made scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with real butter, coffee strong enough to strip paint. I ate slowly, tasting every bite, feeling something shift inside me. The eggs were hot and fluffy, the cheese melted perfectly, the butter soaking into the toast exactly the way I liked it. When had I last eaten food prepared the way I wanted it? When had I last taken up space in my own kitchen without apologizing? That afternoon, while Rebecca was out shopping and Gerald was at the golf course, I called a lawyer. Not the family attorney Gerald had used for years, but someone I found through an online search for elder abuse specialists. Her name was Patricia Chen, and when I told her my story, she did not sound surprised. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, her voice kind but firm, "what you are describing is financial exploitation and psychological abuse. It happens more often than you think, especially when there is significant property or money involved. We need to act quickly, and we need to be strategic." We met the next day at her office in the Loop, a sleek space that smelled like new carpet and possibility. Patricia was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed all my photographs, asked detailed questions about the timeline, and took notes in quick, efficient strokes. Her office was on the 23rd floor of a glass building on Wacker Drive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, boats gliding past like they had all the time in the world. I watched them while Patricia examined my evidence, these boats that knew where they were going, that had captains steering them toward clear destinations. "Here is what I think is happening," she said, pulling my attention back to the conference table where my entire life was spread out in photocopied evidence. "They are building a case to have you declared incompetent. Once they do that, they can petition for guardianship, take control of all your assets including the house, and essentially lock you out of your own life. The good news is that you are clearly competent and you have evidence of their conspiracy. The bad news is that we need to move faster than they do." She outlined a plan, writing key points on a yellow legal pad in precise handwriting. "First, we would secure my assets by opening new accounts in my name only at a different bank. Second, we would file a police report for financial fraud regarding the credit cards. Third, we would prepare a lawsuit, not just for the money they had taken, but for the damage to my credit and emotional distress. Fourth, and most importantly, we would set a trap." "A trap?" I asked. Patricia smiled, and there was something almost fierce in her expression. "They think you are oblivious. Let's use that. Let's give them an opportunity to show their true intentions in a way that cannot be denied or explained away. Are you willing to do that?" I thought about the pot roast growing cold. I thought about my name being erased from accounts and conversations. I thought about that folder of documents planning my elimination. I thought about being called the subject in emails discussing my destruction like it was a business transaction. "Yes," I said, "I am willing." The trap was brilliant in its simplicity. Patricia helped me draft a document that appeared to be a new will, one that left everything to Gerald, and specifically excluded Thomas unless he divorced Rebecca. It was deliberately provocative, designed to create panic. I left it in my desk drawer, slightly visible, as if I had been working on it and forgotten to put it away. I also started making comments about feeling unwell, about being tired of the burden of property ownership, about maybe it being time to simplify my life. I said these things when I knew Rebecca was listening, which was always, because she had started hovering around me more, watching me with those calculating eyes. The performance required more acting skill than I knew I possessed. I had to seem fragile without seeming incompetent, confused without seeming demented. I practiced in front of my bedroom mirror, working on a certain vagueness in my eyes, a hesitation in my speech. I left cabinet doors open in the kitchen. I asked Gerald what day it was twice in the same afternoon. I forgot to turn off the stove once, making sure Rebecca discovered it. Each moment of pretend weakness felt like swallowing glass, but I could see it working. Rebecca's eyes would gleam whenever I displayed these carefully crafted symptoms. She would exchange glances with Gerald, quick, meaningful looks that said, "See? It is happening, just like we planned." The hardest part was maintaining the performance around Rebecca's children. They were innocent in all of this. A 7-year-old girl named Sophia and a 9-year-old boy named Marcus. They had started calling me Grandma Eleanor, and sometimes they would draw me pictures or ask me to read them stories. I hated deceiving them, hated that they might remember me as the confused old woman who forgot things and seemed scattered. One afternoon, Sophia found me sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, part of my act. "Grandma Eleanor, are you okay?" she asked, her small voice filled with concern. I wanted to scoop her up and tell her the truth, tell her that I was perfectly fine, that I was fighting for my life and my home. Instead, I smiled vaguely and said, "Oh, I am fine, sweetheart, just thinking." "Mommy says you forget things sometimes," Sophia said, crawling into my lap. "But I do not think you forget. I think you just get tired." out of the mouths of babes. This child saw me more clearly than her mother ever had. You are very wise, I told her, holding her close, memorizing the weight of her in my arms, because I knew that when this was over, I would probably never see her again. The bait was set on a Tuesday afternoon. I made a show of going through old photographs, sighing heavily, mentioning to Gerald that I was considering what to do with the house when I am gone. I could see Rebecca's ears practically perk up from where she sat in the living room, pretending to work on her laptop. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. But instead, I crept into the hallway and positioned myself where I could hear the kitchen conversation below. Patricia had advised me to record everything, so I had my phone ready, the recording app already running. The hallway was dark, and I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, just outside the pool of light that spilled from the kitchen. My knees ached from sitting on the hardwood, but I did not dare move. I barely dared to breathe. It took less than 10 minutes for the masks to come off. Did you see it? Rebecca's voice, excited and eager. The will, it is in her desk drawer. She is cutting Thomas out, unless he leaves me. Gerald's response was weary. So what do? We accelerate the plan. We need to move on the competency evaluation this week, not next month. I already have Dr. Morrison ready to testify that she is showing signs of dementia. We just need one incident, one public moment where she seems confused or irrational. I do not know, Rebecca. Thomas's voice, uncertain. Maybe we are going too far. She is still my mother. Your mother who is about to cut you out of millions of dollars in inheritance. Rebecca's voice turned sharp, and I could hear her moving, probably pacing the way she did when she was agitated. Do you want to spend the rest of your life struggling while she hoards everything? She does not need this house. She does not even appreciate it. We could sell it, invest the money properly, build something real for our family. Our family. Thomas repeated the words slowly. Yes, our family, not her. She had her chance at life. This is our turn. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. This was my son, my child, discussing my life as if it were nothing more than a business transaction. Gerald cleared his throat. What about the pension? Can we redirect that? Already in motion. Once she is declared incompetent, you become her legal guardian, and all her income flows through you. We have talked about this. She will not suspect anything? Gerald asked. She will not suspect anything, Rebecca said, her voice filled with certainty. She is too far gone already. All those little comments about being confused, about forgetting things. We have been laying groundwork for months. Everyone already thinks she is slipping. This will just confirm it. What if she fights it? Thomas asked. What if she gets her own lawyer? Rebecca laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. With what money? We control the accounts. We control her access to resources. We have isolated her from anyone who might help. Her friends think she is losing her mind. Her sister barely calls anymore because we made it uncomfortable. Who is going to believe a confused old woman over her devoted family who just wants to help? Thomas laughed then, a sound that felt like a knife between my ribs. Sometimes I almost feel bad. But then I remember how she never really supported us, always making comments about your spending, always acting like she knows better. Exactly, Rebecca said. This is not cruelty. This is justice. She has had control long enough. It is time for the next generation to take over. I listened to them toast with wine glasses, the clink of crystal carrying up through the heating vent. I listened to them plan which rooms they would renovate first, how much they could get for the house if they sold it, whether they should keep the basement for storage or rent it out again once I was taken care of. I was thinking, Rebecca said, and I could hear papers rustling. Once we have guardianship, we can move her into Shady Meadows. It is one of those nice facilities, not too expensive, and it is far enough outside the city that visiting will be inconvenient. That way we do not have to deal with her constantly. "How much does a place like that cost?" Gerald asked. "About $4,000 a month, but we will be using her pension for that, so it actually saves us money. No more groceries for her, no more utilities, no more any of it. And once the house sells, we can invest that money and live off the returns." They had it all planned. They had calculated the cost of my existence down to the dollar, found the most efficient way to remove me from their lives while maximizing their financial gain. Taken care of. Like I was a problem to be solved, a mess to be cleaned up. When I finally crept back to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and let myself feel everything I had been holding back. The rage, the grief, the absolute devastation of knowing that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and money. But underneath all that pain, something else was growing. Something hard and bright and unbreakable. Determination. The next morning, I called Patricia and played her the recording. Her silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, sharper, almost excited. This was not just a case to her anymore. This was personal. "Mrs. Hartwell," she finally said, "this is exactly what we needed. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft. You have them. You have them completely." "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now? Now we spring the trap." Patricia arranged for a cognitive assessment with an independent neurologist, someone who had no connection to Dr. Morrison or my family. The appointment was at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, in the neurology department on the 8th floor. The neurologist, Dr. Sarah Kendrick, was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that were both kind and assessing. The evaluation took 3 hours. Dr. Kendrick put me through a battery of tests: memory recall, pattern recognition, problem solving, spatial awareness. She asked me to draw a clock showing a specific time. She had me remember a list of words and repeat them back 5 minutes later. She showed me pictures and asked me to name the objects. She asked me to count backwards from 100 by sevens. I had been so anxious that I would fail somehow, that the stress and grief of the past months had actually damaged my mind. But the tests came easily. I remembered the words. I drew the clock correctly. I counted backwards without error. The results came back exactly as I knew they would. I was completely competent, with no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. In fact, the neurologist noted that my memory and reasoning skills were above average for my age. "Mrs. Hartwell," Dr. Kendrick said, handing me a folder with the official assessment, "I do not know what is going on in your life that prompted this evaluation, but I want you to know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with your cognitive function. You are sharp, articulate, and fully capable of managing your own affairs." I cried then, in that sterile office with its motivational posters about brain health and its model of the human skull sitting on the desk. I cried because someone with authority had confirmed what I knew but had been made to doubt. I was okay. I was not the problem. Armed with this assessment, the recordings, and all the financial documentation, Patricia filed multiple legal actions simultaneously. A restraining order preventing Gerald and Rebecca from accessing any accounts with my name on them. A police report for identity theft and fraud. A lawsuit for financial exploitation and emotional abuse. And most importantly, an emergency hearing to prevent any attempt to declare me incompetent or assume guardianship. The papers were served on a Friday morning. I will never forget the look on Rebecca's face when the process server handed her the thick manila envelope. She went pale, then red, then pale again. Gerald stood in the hallway, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Thomas came running from upstairs. "What is happening? Mom, what is this?" I looked at my son, this man I had raised, this person I had loved more than my own life, and I felt nothing but disappointment. "This is me fighting back," I said quietly. "This is me refusing to disappear. Rebecca found her voice first. This is insane. Eleanor, you are clearly confused. Someone has taken advantage of you, turned you against your own family. I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Their voices filled the room, cold and clear and absolutely damning. She will not suspect anything, Rebecca's voice said from the speaker, and I watched the color drain from her face entirely. How did you, she stammered. I recorded you planning to steal my life, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have bank statements showing you have stolen $60,000. I have emails showing you conspired with an attorney to take my house. I have credit card bills for purchases I never made. And I have a neurological assessment proving I am completely competent. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a car passing on the street outside, my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Gerald tried to speak. Eleanor, I can explain. No, I cut him off. You cannot. There is no explanation that makes this acceptable. You conspired to rob me, to lock me away, to erase me from my own life. You made me doubt my sanity. You isolated me from my friends. You stole money I worked 40 years to earn. Mom, please, Thomas started. Do not call me that, I said, and my voice broke. A son does not do this to his mother. A son does not laugh about putting her in a facility, so visiting will be inconvenient. You gave up the right to call me Mom when you decided I was just an obstacle to your inheritance. Thomas's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the little boy he had been, the child who had cried when his goldfish died, who had held my hand on his first day of school. Then the moment passed, and he was just a stranger again, a stranger who had tried to steal my life. You need to leave, I said to all three of them. This is my house. My name is on the deed. And as of this morning, there is a restraining order preventing any of you from accessing my financial accounts or making decisions on my behalf. Patricia Chen, my attorney, has filed multiple lawsuits and criminal complaints. The police have been notified of the fraud. And if any of you attempt to contact me, except through legal channels, I will have you arrested for harassment. I had practiced these words with Patricia, rehearsed them until I could say them without my voice shaking. But standing in my living room, watching the people I had loved most in the world realize they had been caught, the words came out stronger than I had imagined. I was not asking. I was not negotiating. I was telling them how things were going to be from now on. Rebecca tried one more time. You are making a huge mistake. We were only trying to help you, to protect you from yourself. When you are in that nursing home, alone and forgotten, you will realize we were right. If I end up in a nursing home, I said quietly, it will be because I choose to go. Not because you committed fraud to put me there. Now get out of my house. The legal proceedings that followed were brutal. Gerald tried to claim he had no knowledge of Rebecca's plans, but the joint accounts and his voice on the recording proved otherwise. Thomas attempted to apologize, but his words rang hollow. Rebecca hired an expensive attorney and tried to paint me as a vindictive old woman conducting a witch hunt, but the evidence was overwhelming. The depositions were particularly painful. I had to sit across from Gerald, from Thomas, from Rebecca, and answer questions about the most intimate details of my deteriorating life. I had to describe what it felt like to be erased. I had to quantify my suffering in legal terms, translate emotional devastation into compensatory damages. Rebecca's attorney tried to discredit the recording, arguing it had been obtained illegally. But Patricia countered that Illinois is a one-party consent state. I could legally record conversations I was part of, and even if I was not directly participating. The recording was in my own home, where I had a reasonable expectation of privacy. The breaking point came during a deposition when Rebecca was confronted with the credit card fraud. She broke down, admitted everything, claimed she had been under tremendous financial pressure and made poor choices. Her attorney immediately tried to negotiate a settlement, but Patricia and I had already decided we would not accept anything less than full accountability. Mrs. Garrison, Patricia asked during the deposition, her voice calm but relentless. "You stated that you felt financial pressure. Can you explain why you believed you were entitled to resolve that pressure by stealing from your mother-in-law?" Rebecca's face crumpled. I did not think of it as stealing. I thought we were family. I thought what was hers would eventually be ours anyway. "So you decided to accelerate the timeline by having her declared incompetent and institutionalized?" "It was not like that." "Then what was it like, Mrs. Garrison? Please explain to me how planning to move your mother-in-law to a facility far from the city, so visiting would be inconvenient, was anything other than elder abuse." Rebecca had no answer. The criminal charges for identity theft and fraud moved forward. The police investigation uncovered even more financial manipulation than I had initially known about. Rebecca had taken out a home equity line of credit against the brownstone using forged documents with my signature. She had opened store credit cards, utility accounts, even a car lease in my name. The total amount of debt she had created was over $140,000. $140,000 of my future, my security, my peace of mind, stolen. Gerald was charged as an accessory. Thomas was not criminally charged, but the civil lawsuit named him as a defendant for his role in the conspiracy. The family I had built my entire life around was disintegrating, and I was the one holding the match. There were moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Late at night, I would think about Thomas as a little boy, how he used to climb into my lap when he had nightmares, how he would bring me dandelions from the yard like they were roses. I would think about Gerald, how we had danced at our wedding, how he had held my hand through my mother's funeral. But then I would remember the recording. She will not suspect anything. I would remember the pot roast growing cold. I would remember the feeling of being erased, one piece at a time, from my own existence. And I would know that love without respect is not love at all. It is just another form of using someone. The civil trial was scheduled for 6 months after the initial filing. In that time, I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. Patricia helped me restore my credit by documenting all the fraudulent accounts and filing disputes with the credit bureaus. It was a long process, but slowly my score began to recover. Each fraudulent account required a police report, an affidavit, copies of the identity theft documentation. I spent hours on the phone with credit card companies, explaining over and over that, no, I did not purchase $5,000 worth of boutique clothing inventory. No, I did not open a line of credit at a home improvement store. No, I did not lease a BMW. Some representatives were sympathetic. Others were skeptical, as if I might be trying to get out of legitimate debts. I learned to keep my voice steady, to recite the fraud case number, to cite the criminal charges that had been filed. I learned to advocate for myself in ways I had never had to before. I reopened the brownstone's basement apartment and found a wonderful tenant, a graduate student at Northwestern who reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious, kind, grateful for a safe place to live. Her name was Amira, and she was studying public health. She paid her rent on time, kept the space clean, and sometimes brought me tea when she heard me moving around upstairs late at night. "My grandmother lived with us when I was growing up," she told me one evening when I had invited her up for dinner. "She taught me that elders should be respected, cherished. I cannot imagine treating her the way your family treated you." The rental income resumed, and with it came a small measure of financial stability. I started attending a support group for victims of elder abuse. The first meeting was terrifying. I almost turned around and went home 3 times. I sat in my car outside the church for 15 minutes, watching other people walk in, telling myself I did not need this, that I could handle everything on my own. But that was a lie. I had been handling everything on my own for too long, and it had nearly destroyed me. I forced myself to walk through that church basement door, to sit in the circle of metal folding chairs, to introduce myself. There were 8 other people there, 7 women and 1 man, ranging in age from their 60s to their 80s. Each of them had a story. Each of them had been betrayed by people they trusted. "My name is Eleanor," I said, my voice shaking, "and my family stole from me." The relief of saying it out loud, of being believed without question, of seeing recognition in other people's eyes instead of doubt, was overwhelming. I cried through most of that first meeting, but I kept going back, and slowly I started to heal. I learned that financial abuse of elders is shockingly common. I learned about the tactics abusers use: isolation, gaslighting, financial manipulation, threats, manufactured crises. I learned that I was not weak or stupid for falling victim to it. I learned that the people we love most can hurt us the deepest, and that acknowledging that truth is not a betrayal, it is survival. One woman in the group, Judith, became a close friend. She had a similar story. Her daughter had drained her savings and tried to force her into a nursing home to take her house. Judith had fought back too, and she understood the complicated grief that came with choosing yourself over people who had betrayed you. "People think it is simple," Judith told me over coffee one afternoon. "They think you just walk away and never look back. But these are people we loved. These are people who were supposed to protect us. The loss is real, even when the relationship was toxic." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest. I was grieving. I was grieving the family I thought I had, the son I thought I had raised, the husband I thought I had married. They were dead to me now, not because I wished them harm, but because the people I had loved had never really existed. They had been masks, performances, lies I had told myself, because the truth was too painful to accept. The trial itself was anticlimactic. Gerald and Rebecca's attorneys negotiated a settlement the morning we were scheduled to begin. They would pay restitution for all the stolen money, plus damages for emotional distress. Rebecca would plead guilty to reduced charges and serve probation instead of jail time. Gerald would sign a legal separation agreement and move out of the brownstone permanently. Part of me wanted to refuse the settlement, to force them to sit through a public trial where every detail of their cruelty would be exposed. But Patricia advised against it. "You have already won," she said. "You have your home, your financial security, your freedom. A trial would just drag this out, keep you tied to them for months or years more. Sometimes the best revenge is moving on and building a life they can never touch again." She was right. I accepted the settlement. Thomas was not part of the settlement. He chose to stand by Rebecca, to paint me as the villain in their story. The last time I saw him, he was outside the courthouse, refusing to meet my eyes, his arm around his wife's shoulders. I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to feel righteous. Instead, I just felt tired and sad and done. The judge approved the settlement. Patricia shook my hand and told me I had been incredibly brave. The other attorney would not look at me. Gerald left through a side door without saying goodbye. I walked out of that courthouse alone into the bright afternoon sun of downtown Chicago, and I realized something profound. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was free. The months that followed were transformative in ways I could not have predicted. With the settlement money, I paid off all the fraudulent debts and had enough left over to do something I had never done before. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in helping seniors protect their assets. Her name was Monica, and she was patient with my questions, never making me feel stupid for not understanding investment terminology. Together, we created a trust that protected the brownstone and my other assets from future manipulation. We set up automatic bill pay so I never had to worry about missing payments. We created a budget that allowed me to live comfortably on my pension while building a small emergency fund. For the first time in my life, I felt in control of my finances instead of being controlled by them. I also started therapy. My therapist, Dr. Okafor, helped me understand the patterns that had made me vulnerable to exploitation. The way I had been taught to equate my worth with my usefulness to others. The way I had learned to silence my own needs in favor of keeping peace. The way I had allowed people to mistreat me because I was afraid of being alone. "You chose being treated poorly over being alone," Dr. Okafor said during one session. "But now you have learned that being alone is not the worst thing. Being with people who diminish you is worse." It was a hard truth to accept, but it was also liberating. Dr. Okafor's office became a sanctuary. It was a small space on the second floor of a Victorian house in Lincoln Park, decorated with plants and soft lighting. She kept a box of tissues on the table between us, and I went through most of it during our sessions. But slowly, week by week, I started to understand myself better. "Tell me about your mother," Dr. Okafor asked one day. I described her, a woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table after my father left, who had taught me that my needs did not matter as much as my responsibilities, who had praised me only when I was useful. "So you learned early that love was transactional," Dr. Okafor said gently, "that you had to earn it by being helpful, by not making trouble, by putting yourself last." I had never thought of it that way, but she was right. My entire life had been built on that foundation, and Rebecca had exploited it perfectly. I started doing things I had denied myself for years. I joined a watercolor painting class at the local community center and discovered I had a knack for landscapes. There was something meditative about mixing colors, about watching them bleed and blend on the paper, creating something that had not existed before. My first painting was terrible, a muddy mess that was supposed to be the Chicago skyline, but looked more like a child's scribble. But my second was better, and my third better still. By the end of the 10-week course, I had created a painting of the lakefront at sunset that the instructor asked to display in the community center gallery. I started volunteering at a literacy program, using my teaching skills to help adults learn to read. My first student was a 50-year-old man named Marcus who had hidden his illiteracy his entire life. Watching his face light up when he successfully read his first complete sentence made something in my chest crack open. "I can do this," he whispered, his finger tracking the words. "I am actually doing this." "You are," I confirmed. "You absolutely are." Teaching again reminded me of who I had been before I became invisible. I had been someone who mattered, who made a difference, who changed lives. I could be that person again. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a grumpy orange tabby named Clarence, who slept on my feet and demanded attention on his own schedule. The shelter volunteer had warned me that Clarence was difficult, that he had been returned twice by adopters who found him too antisocial. "Perfect," I said. "We will be antisocial together." Clarence and I understood each other. We had both learned not to trust easily, to protect ourselves, to expect disappointment. But slowly, he started sitting on my lap during evening television. He started purring when I scratched behind his ears. He started greeting me at the door when I came home. If a grumpy cat could learn to trust again, so could I. I reconnected with my sister in Milwaukee. We had not spoken much in years, partly because of my isolation, but also because I had been too ashamed to tell her what was happening. When I finally called and explained everything, she cried. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I could hear it in your voice, but every time I asked, you said everything was fine." "I was lying," I admitted. "To you and to myself." She visited the next weekend, and we spent 3 days talking, laughing, crying, and rebuilding the bond we had lost. She helped me clean out Gerald's things from the house, donating most of it and throwing away the rest. We repainted the bedroom a soft sage green and bought new curtains. We turned Gerald's office into a reading room, lined with bookshelves and a comfortable chair by the window. "This is your space now," my sister said, hanging the last curtain. "No one else's, just yours." The house started to feel like mine again. Not ours, mine. My book club friends reached out tentatively, having heard through the community grapevine about what had happened. I was nervous to see them again, worried about judgment or pity. But when I walked into our first meeting in over a year, they stood up and applauded. "We are sorry," Donna said. "We should have pushed harder, asked more questions. We let you disappear and that was wrong." I learned that several of them had suspected something was off, but had believed Rebecca's stories about my declining health. They felt guilty for not investigating further, for accepting the easy explanation instead of trusting their instincts. "I do not blame you," I told them honestly. She was convincing, and I was hiding. We were all doing the best we could with the information we had. Forgiveness, I was learning, was complicated. I could forgive them while still acknowledging the pain of being abandoned. I could rebuild trust while maintaining boundaries. I could let people back in without giving them the power to destroy me again. 6 months after the trial, I did something I had dreamed about, but never dared to do. I booked a trip to Ireland, a place my mother-in-law had always wanted to visit, but never got the chance. I decided to go for both of us. I spent 2 weeks wandering through Dublin, exploring coastal villages, hiking through green hills that seemed to glow in the rain. I stayed in bed and breakfasts where the owners treated me like family, sharing stories over hearty breakfasts and pots of strong tea. I visited ancient castles and modern pubs, libraries and markets, places that had existed long before my pain and would exist long after. In Cork, I joined a walking tour led by a woman named Fiona who told stories about Irish history with such passion that I found myself completely absorbed. After the tour, we had tea together, and I found myself telling her everything: the abuse, the betrayal, the fight, the freedom. She listened without judgment, without pity, with only compassionate understanding. "My own daughter tried something similar," she said quietly. "Not as elaborate, but she was working on it. I caught her early, thank God. It is a terrible thing, is it not? To realize that the person you gave life to sees you as nothing more than a bank account." "How did you move past it?" I asked. "I am not sure I have," Fiona admitted. "But I have learned to live with it. I have learned that I can be happy without her approval or her presence. I have learned that the family you choose matters more than the family you are born into." That conversation, sitting in a small tea shop in Cork, with rain pattering against the windows, helped me understand that healing is not about forgetting or forgiving everything. It is about accepting what happened and choosing to build a life anyway. In Galway, I met a woman named Siobhan who ran a small bookshop. She was probably my age, with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. We started talking about books and ended up having dinner together. "I left my husband 10 years ago," she told me over fish and chips. "Everyone said I was mad. 53 years old, starting over. But it was the best decision I ever made. I would rather be alone and at peace than together and miserable." "I am learning that," I said. She smiled. "You will do more than learn it. You will live it, and it will be grand." One afternoon, standing on the cliffs of Moher with the wind whipping my hair and the Atlantic stretching endless before me, I felt something shift inside my chest. It was like a locked door opening, like light pouring into a room that had been dark for too long. I had spent so many years making myself smaller, quieter, less. I had apologized for existing, for having needs, for taking up space. I had let people convince me that my worth was measured by what I could give them, by how little trouble I caused, by how easily I could be ignored. But standing on that cliff, feeling the power of the ocean and the wildness of the wind, I remembered something I had forgotten. I was Eleanor Hartwell. I had been a teacher for 38 years, shaping young minds and changing lives. I had survived my mother's death, my mother-in-law's death, my husband's betrayals. I had rebuilt my credit, my home, my sense of self. I was not a burden. I was not a problem. I was not someone to be managed or eliminated. I was a survivor. And I was free. When I returned to Chicago, I made one final decision. I created a scholarship fund at my old school in my mother-in-law's name, funded by part of the settlement money. It would help students from low-income families pay for college, giving them opportunities they might not otherwise have. The first scholarship was awarded to a young woman named Maria who wanted to study social work. At the ceremony, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." And I realized that this, investing in the next generation, helping people who actually appreciated it, choosing where my resources went instead of having them taken. This was what legacy really meant. Not forcing people to love me, not buying affection or loyalty, but freely giving to those who valued it, who would use it to build something good. Thomas called once, about a year after the trial. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain, "I just wanted you to know that Rebecca and I are getting divorced." I waited, saying nothing. "You were right about her, about everything. I was just too stubborn to see it." He paused. "I am sorry. I know that does not fix anything, but I am sorry." I closed my eyes, feeling the complicated swirl of emotions, relief that he had finally seen the truth, sadness for the years we had lost, anger that it had taken losing her to make him value me. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand something, Thomas. I am not waiting for you to be ready to have a relationship with me. I am not holding my breath for you to choose me. I have built a life that does not require your approval or your presence. If you want to be part of it, you need to earn that privilege. Do you understand?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I understand," he finally said. "Can I try?" "You can try," I agreed. "But it will take time, and there will be boundaries. And if you ever make me feel like I am less important than money or convenience or keeping the peace, I will walk away and never look back." "Okay," he said softly. "That is fair." We started with monthly phone calls, brief at first, awkward. Slowly, we built toward coffee meetings in neutral locations. I learned about his new job, his therapy, his efforts to understand how he had been manipulated. He learned about my painting classes, my volunteer work, my trip to Ireland. The first few calls were stilted, full of long pauses and careful words. We were like strangers learning to speak the same language, testing what was safe to say, what topics we could navigate without reopening wounds that were still raw. "How is Clarence?" Thomas asked during our third call. "Grumpy as ever," I said. "He knocked over a plant this morning because I was 5 minutes late with his breakfast." Thomas laughed, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Almost like the relationship we could have had, if only he had chosen differently from the start. But then the moment passed, and we were back to careful politeness. It would be a long road if we walked it at all. Some days I was not sure I had the energy for it. Some days I thought about telling him we were done, that the damage was too deep, that some things could not be repaired, no matter how much therapy you underwent or how sorry you claimed to be. But other days, I thought about Sophia asking if I was okay. I thought about the little boy who had brought me dandelions. I thought about the possibility, however slim, that people could change, could grow, could become better than their worst choices. I had not decided yet. Maybe I never would. Maybe this uncertain middle ground, this cautious reconnection, was the best we would ever manage, and maybe that had to be enough. Our first coffee meeting was at a Starbucks downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had memories. Thomas looked older than I remembered, lines around his eyes that had not been there before. He had lost weight. "You look well," he said. "I am well," I replied, "better than I have been in years." We talked about safe topics at first, the weather, the city, a new restaurant that had opened nearby. Then, slowly, we edged toward more difficult territory. "I want you to know that I see a therapist now," Thomas said. We talk a lot about patterns, about how Rebecca manipulated both of us. Not that it excuses what I did. Nothing excuses that. No, I agreed. Nothing does. But I am trying to understand it. How I let it happen. Why I chose her version of reality over yours. I sipped my coffee, considering my words carefully. You chose convenience over conscience. You chose money over morality. Those are not small things, Thomas. Those are fundamental character issues. He flinched, but did not argue. I know. It was not the relationship we had before. That relationship was dead, buried alongside the illusions and lies. But maybe, with time and work and honesty, we could build something new. Something based on mutual respect instead of obligation. Something that honored both of us. Gerald, I never spoke to again. He sent a few emails through his lawyer, asking about the possibility of reconciliation. I ignored them all. There was nothing left to say to a man who had conspired to steal my life, who had watched me shrink and suffer and did nothing, who had chosen greed over the woman he had promised to love and honor. His last email, which his lawyer forwarded to Patricia, who then forwarded to me, said, "After 45 years of marriage, you owe me a conversation." I owed him nothing. I had paid my debts to that relationship with decades of loyalty, with forgiveness for his financial irresponsibility, with patience for his selfishness. I had more than paid. The account was closed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never found those documents, if I had never overheard that conversation. Would they have succeeded? Would I be in some facility right now, declared incompetent, my house sold, my money gone, my voice silenced permanently? The thought makes me sick, but it also makes me grateful. Grateful for the moment of courage that made me look in that desk. Grateful for Patricia Chen and her fierce advocacy. Grateful for Judith and the support group and every person who believed me when I finally found the strength to tell the truth. I turned 73 last month. I spent my birthday exactly how I wanted to. Brunch with my sister and my book club friends, an afternoon painting in the park, dinner cooked by my tenant Amira, who has become more like a granddaughter than a renter. Clarence the cat sat on my lap while I opened cards and small gifts, purring his grumpy approval. It was simple. It was peaceful. It was mine. The cards were not from people who felt obligated to remember me. They were from people who genuinely cared. Donna from book club, Judith from the support group, my sister Amira, even Patricia Chen sent a card with a note that said, "Happy birthday to the bravest client I have ever had." These were relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on obligation or financial interest. Amira had made my favorite meal, roasted chicken with herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, and fresh green beans. She had even baked a small cake, chocolate with buttercream frosting, because I had mentioned once that I loved chocolate cake. She remembered. She cared enough to remember and to act on that memory. That simple gesture meant more to me than 1,000 obligatory birthday dinners from people who resented my existence. That evening, I stood in my reading room, looking at the photographs I had chosen to keep. Not the formal family portraits that had been carefully staged lies, but candid shots of real moments. Me and my sister as children, building sandcastles at Lake Michigan. Me in my classroom on the last day of school, surrounded by students. My mother-in-law in her garden, dirt under her fingernails and joy on her face. These were my people. These were the relationships that had mattered, that had been real, that had seen me as a whole person rather than a resource to be exploited. I thought about adding a photo from Ireland, me on those cliffs with my arms spread wide and my face turned to the sky. A reminder of the moment I chose myself. A reminder that it is never too late to fight back, to stand up, to reclaim your life. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this is that staying silent does not keep the peace. It just makes the abuse quieter. People stay in these situations because they are afraid afraid of being alone, afraid of losing family, afraid of what others will think. But the cost of staying is so much higher than the cost of leaving. Your dignity, your health, your sense of self, these things are worth fighting for. If you are experiencing financial exploitation or emotional abuse from family members, please know that you are not crazy, you are not overreacting, and you are not alone. There are resources available: elder abuse hotlines, legal aid societies, support groups. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, not used and discarded. And if you have watched this happen to someone else, speak up. Do not accept easy explanations about confusion or decline. Ask questions. Offer support.